Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So, yesterday I was on Facebook and I came across a very interesting video about the Student Government Association of Western Kentucky University passing a resolution in support of reparations. This resolution talked about current achievement gaps being rooted back to slavery. It talked about segregation and underfunded Black schools. It talked about how education is out of reach for a disproportionate number of students of color compared to white students. It talked about standardized tests affecting the applicant pool. It also talked about underrepresentation of African Americans on the faculty and in the student body. It talked about how standardized tests uphold white supremacy. And in the very last clause, it read as follows. It reads as follows. Be it resolved that the Student Government Association of Western Kentucky University support reparations for Black students. We call for a special task force be established by the university to assess the feasibility of test optional admissions and geographically weighed admissions. Admissions criteria at Western Kentucky are subject to policies put forth by the Board of Regents, and thus this task force should work with both internal and external stakeholders to develop its assessment. We demand reparations for the systemic denial of access to high quality educational opportunities in the form of full and free access for all Black people, including undocumented, currently and formerly incarcerated people, to Western Kentucky University. So that's the resolution. So that was the resolution. So in response to that resolution, Tucker Carlson of Fox News interviewed one of the co-authors of the resolution, and he raised some interesting questions during that discussion. The first question that he talked about was this issue of Black immigrants and whether or not the resolution should apply to them. He was asking about immigrants who came to this country after slavery and after Jim Crow, whether or not they should receive reparations under this resolution. And my response to that question would be this: I don't think that they should be included in this resolution for reparations because this resolution specifically deals with slavery in the United States and Jim Crow in the United States. So for that reason, I don't think that they should be included in this resolution. Now, I obviously believe that people in the Caribbean and people in Africa should receive reparations, and I say that because as we know, people in the Caribbean were enslaved just like people in the United States. As we know, Africa was raped of its human and material resources. Africa was subjected to colonialism and oppression and exploitation. So, yes, Africa should receive all kinds of reparations for the exploitation and oppression of African people. But in terms of this particular resolution, I do not think that African and Caribbean immigrants should be included in that resolution. Now, I want to deal with some other questions that were raised during this discussion. And one thing that Tucker Carlson brought up was this issue about how do we prove that a family has been affected by slavery and Jim Crow. He went on to ask whether or not blood tests need to be taken and all that kind of stuff. And this is what I'll say. I mean, we know that slavery was well documented. They had logs documenting the slaves with the records of who owned the slaves, the names of the slaves, and all that kind of stuff. For the most part, many people who are Africans and who are indigenous in this country, who lived in this country, who are not immigrants, most of us, the overwhelming majority of us, are descendants of slaves in this country. And this is easily documented, Many families who have done the basic research can trace the names of people who were enslaved in their families. So that is not a difficult question. Any African American who has relatives who lived during the Jim Crow era should be entitled to reparations for Jim Crow, and that's easily documented. It's easy to document, when people came to this country, if they were actually living under Jim Crow conditions, how they were affected by Jim Crow. That's easily documented. That's not a question of doing a blood test or anything like that. It's really quite simple. So I think that that question was raised as a red herring to try to paint this question of reparations in a negative way. So that's my response to that. The other issue that I want to deal with is this whole question of so-called reverse discrimination and favoritism. As the author of this resolution pointed out, demanding justice is not favoritism. Demanding justice for hundreds of years of being held back economically, educationally, socially, that's not favoritism, that's justice. We were denied the ability to get an education. For all those hundreds of years Black people were enslaved, our people were denied education. It was impermissible for Black people to even learn how to read during slavery times. They had all kinds of laws after slavery that ensured that Black people would have a inferior education. So we were held back, and trying to create some kind of justice for that unjust situation, to try to remedy that unjust situation, to try to repair that unjust and evil legacy, that's not favoritism. That's about repairing damage that was done back then and that still has lasting and continuing effects today. As for reverse racism, in terms of them allowing African Americans to get free education and other people not being able to get free education and all that kind of stuff. The bottom line is this: I think that education should be free, period, for all citizens. Every single citizen should be entitled to a free higher education. That should not be something that is about privilege. That should not be something that is about how much money someone has, because many people, and a disproportionate number of the people who are prevented from getting an education simply because they cannot afford it, are African American people. So we are disproportionately affected by these requirements that people pay exorbitant amounts to get an education. So I think that due to that, and due to this legacy of us being enslaved in this country, working for nothing for hundreds of years, I think that that is the least that these people can do, is give African people a free education, a free higher education. That's the least that they could do. I mean, we're talking about a country that has built its wealth off of the enslavement of African people. We're talking about universities that have profited off of the enslavement of African people. I read an article about how Georgetown actually had slaves. Georgetown University owned slaves, and they profited by selling over 200 and something slaves. These institutions profited off of our enslavement. For all intents and purposes, these institutions are indebted to Black people. This country is in debt to Black people. And what better way to pay back a small portion of that debt than to give Black people free higher education? So that's my response to that question. And, I think that it is important that they passed this resolution because it has generated a very vital discussion about reparations. But I think that we need to move beyond discussing reparations. We need to move beyond that and move towards implementing reparations. And the first way to do that is to pass H.R. 40, a law that John Conyers has put forth for many years that has gained zero traction. Before we vote for any politician in Congress, any senator or any congressman, we need to ask them, what is your position on H.R. 40? What is your position on that? That needs to be one of the first questions that we need to ask. The next point I want to address is this question about whether or not standardized tests are tools of white supremacy. And we know that there have been studies done about how certain tests are culturally biased. We understand that well. But I think that in terms of excellence, in terms of us achieving in this society, I think that that kind of rhetoric, while it's understandable, I don't think that it serves us to simply complain about a test being a tool of white supremacy. Instead, I think what we would be better served at doing is preparing our young people to succeed on those tests, to pass those tests. If other groups of people of different nationalities who are non-white can take those tests and succeed on those tests, and even African Americans do well. Some African Americans do well on those standardized tests. So I think that what we need to do is prepare instead of complain. Prepare our young people to be excellent, to get the best grades, to get the best scores on these standardized tests. And that's not a mission impossible. That's something that is very achievable. And that's something that we need to focus on. So again, I understand the importance of calling out how those tests are culturally biased, but I don't think that we should just get comfortable complaining, and instead we need to prepare. So that's my point with respect to that. So lastly, I want to address the question that Tucker Carlson raised about the situation involving an African American student who has parents who are doctors. And really, I think that that question is a red herring because, that's not the case for most African Americans. Most African Americans are not in that situation where they have two wealthy parents who are doctors. That is an anomaly. Although it exists, it's a rare case and it's not the normative situation. So I think that that is just thrown out there to try to undercut this whole argument for reparations and even affirmative action. Now, in response to that, even if someone has parents who are doctors, the fact of the matter is that if they are descendants of slaves, that means that their ancestors were forced to work for hundreds of years without compensation. So reparations has nothing to do with someone being able to become a doctor or a lawyer or their family having some kind of success. That just means that their family were able to achieve despite that legacy of slavery, and that still does not deny them the right to recover reparations for the injustices that were done to their ancestors. So the fact that they became doctors does not negate the fact that their ancestors were deprived of compensation, were exploited and oppressed. And if we were not subjected to all those years of slavery, where we were denied education for hundreds of years, where we were denied the ability to be wealthy, then who knows where we could be as a people right now? I mean, that doctor, those doctors who were able to accomplish that despite adversity, imagine what they would be without those obstacles. They would be even greater. They would have even more wealth. So the fact that they were able to achieve success, that shouldn't be used against them to deprive them of reparations that they are entitled to for the enslavement of their ancestors. No one tells the Jews who were subjected to the Holocaust that they cannot receive reparations simply because they were able to become accomplished people despite the Holocaust. Nobody says that. Nobody reasons like that. Nobody says that to the Japanese who were interned and all that kind of stuff during World War II. Nobody says that to the Native Americans. So why are they presenting that red herring and that ridiculous argument to undercut the request or the demand for reparations? So those are my thoughts on this issue. Tell me what you think. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace.